Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and as you can see, back with us today is the great James Stevens Valliant, here today to talk to us about one of his favorite topics, and it's actually pretty near and dear to me as well, and that is the impact that Dr. Leonard Peikoff has had on the Objectivist movement. Welcome, Jim.
Well, thank you. You know, my real motive for being here is to always get that amazing introduction from you about the amazing or the great Jim Valliant. So really, I'm here to get the psychological, feed.
The boost, the
The boost, the
self-esteem
boost.
boost.
Oh,
Yeah, we
yeah.
all need it.
Thank you,
Yeah.
my brother.
Yeah.
Yes. And
That's a good, I need to get myself a gig where someone introduces me that way. That's what
that's
I need.
exactly that. That is it. You got it worked out in life when you got someone like this. Hey,
Yeah.
you're great.
So, Jim, just to share a little something about me, in 2000 and I think 5 now, my mother told me that my father wanted to buy me a chain so that I would have memorabilia, something to remember him by when he passed. And I said, well, that is so outside of my values, worrying about a chain. I said, why not get me the books that I want? They were expensive. There was 3 books I wanted. I said, why not get those for me? And I will always keep these books, and they will always be a reminder of why, of who got them for me, and they'll benefit me. And after some bickering back and forth with my parents, they finally agreed. And the 3 books were Faith and Freedom by Thomas Saz, Capitalism, the mammoth text by George Reisman, and Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff. I've since 2005, and I still have my copy. I must have read it cover to cover, I don't know, 10 times, but I still go to it. And it's so beat up now, and pages are falling out, underline, all kinds of notes and everything else, but I still go to it as a reference. And when I think about the impact that it's had on me and my friends, just that one book, never mind when we're talking about, understanding objectivism or objective communication, ominous parallels, the dim hypothesis. Dr. Peikoff has really enriched my life and in that of some friends of mine. So do want to get into his, his writings, his lectures, and his impact. But first, Leonard is more than just a philosopher to you, more than just a writer. He's also a friend to you and a mentor. So, if you could just tell us, how did you come to meet Leonard Peikoff? What was it like? Just share whatever you think is important to share. I'm not even going to try to guide you because you're better at knowing what's important than I am in this case.
Well, let's see. 41 years ago, it was the summer of 1983. I walk into the Manhattan old Roosevelt, where they got the illegal aliens now? It was a nice old hotel in those days, right? And into the Roosevelt Hotel, one of those ballrooms, Leonard was giving the lecture course, Understanding Objectivism, for the first time, and it was live. And I was already very, very interested in Ayn Rand and Objectivism, and I was studying philosophy at New York University at the time. And so here was my opportunity. I'd taken taped lecture courses on tape from Leonard. I was very impressed with his skill as a teacher imagine hearing a tape on philosophy and finding it valuable and wanting to go back and back, and that was it. Most people, listen, you pay to hear lectures on philosophy, you're not getting any college credit, and you're into it? Yes, I was into it. Because I can tell you what, I told this to Leonard actually just recently. I would go from his taped lecture courses into my courses at NYU, and I would present the objectivist answer to Descartes or to Hume or Kant. And my philosophy professors had no answer. Well, that's a very interesting, I've never heard of that before. So what you're saying, Jim, is that their whole methodology is screwed up at the first. Yes, and they had no, one professor, I had him read Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. And I said, can you see that this is the answer to Hume and Kant? And after explaining it to him, Hume is never going to get necessity or causation from a fleeting sensation. What we need is a theory of concepts. These are axiomatic concepts. And the professor just, yeah, this appears to be a response that directly answers Hume and Kant and the central questions of Western epistemology. That's right. And the professors would give me, I got straight A's, thanks to Leonard Peikoff. So there I am walking 40 years ago into the understanding objectivism, and I still had some significant doubts about objectivism. I really did. Honestly, if I had believed what many people I'd gotten to meet and speak to people like Nathaniel Brandon and Murray Rothbard and other people who had known Ayn Rand, who weren't so positive as Leonard about it, but they weren't also so honest either. And I learned that, and I started learning that the hard way by learning about Ayn Rand's life and learning about Leonard Peikoff. But I walked in the door thinking, look, if this objectivism thing is going to tell me what music I can listen to or who my friends can love, this is a cult, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. I walk in and all of my questions are answered directly. And more than that, my psychoepistemology is now I'm now looking into my own rationalism, my own concrete boundedness, and I'm beginning to understand my own methodology of thinking at a deeper and more profound level. And realizing, no, 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 no. You don't have to love skyscrapers and Rachmaninoff like Ayn Rand did to be an objectivist. And she's not going to tell you that, if you go out with a Christian girl or a Jewish girl, instead of an objectivist girl, you're immoral. Or, if your friend is gay, they're immoral and evil. And I knew that was not for me. And when Leonard explained to me, no, that's not what objectivism is. It's an integrated system of philosophical principles. It's not Ayn Rand's opinion on Beethoven.
Well, there goes my Rachmaninoff collection now, Jim. I got to toss the whole thing, I guess.
No. See, I really do. But you see, I do love Rachmaninoff, and I do love Chopin.
I can't imagine listening to classical music at all. Like no.
I'm sorry for you. I'd love to help guide you there that way. I got to know Leonard though. I was very active in the questioning, and I started socializing with Leonard a little bit, and Objectivists to New York City. But soon thereafter, Leonard moved to California, and in 1985 he founded the Ayn Rand Institute. He was participating in objectivist conferences in the 1980s. I attended those objectivist conferences. At one of them, the guy who was putting on, George Reisman, you mentioned Capitalism book you got, he was putting on these conferences, and he asked me to help Leonard because he was in town, and I happened to be a native of San Diego where the conference was being held. So can you help him find a store and get some supplies for the next week? And I said, sure. So I just pushed a shopping cart around with Leonard in it, and I got to know him. That was the first time I kind of personally interacted with him. What a charming, sweet, wonderful guy. And he was just all humor. He was laughing. And he knew what he wanted. And he had reason. I think he got that from Ayn Rand. He had a very self-conscious, deliberate, I know what I want and I know why. And he could give you you asked, why this and not that, and why here and not just he'd give you the reason. And I figured, okay, that kind of thoughtfulness he probably picked up from Ayn Rand, very deliberate rationality. But 90% of the time it was just laughs and jokes and what a sweet guy he really is. And so we got on. But even with all that, I was still surprised in the late 80s when philosophy PhD asked me to participate in Leonard Peikoff's seminars that he was giving at his home on Saturday nights. The book you also mentioned, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, the definitive statement of Ayn Rand's philosophy, period, full stop. He had still not published it. His great, magnificent treatise on Ayn's philosophy he was just finishing it up, and he wanted a group of people to give him comments chapter by chapter. And so we'd go up to his house every Saturday night, and each chapter we'd give comments and feedback on. And I said, you sure he wants me? I mean, why on earth would he want me? I'm just a law student from San Diego. And no, he specifically requested you. And are you sure he doesn't want philosophy PhDs and professors, maybe even physicists or something, with scientific methodology, historians? No, he wants you, Jim. I was very flattered. And of course, it became, outside of reading Ayn Rand's works themselves, the most impactful, the most electric intellectual experience I had was going up to Leonard Peikoff's house to discuss. First, we did OPAR, and when his treatise came out, because we all wanted to keep going. So we kept meeting on Saturday nights to talk about whatever Leonard wanted to talk about. Logical induction, great plays or poems, you name it. We were there to talk about his work. And that went on for a couple more years until he moved to Colorado. But the point is, that was an unbelievable experience. And then in the 1990s, later on, my wife and I created a television pilot interview program called Ideas in Action. We actually, won awards, cinema and industry awards for those pilots. And we were told by industry insiders that our interview format had a great influence. And they were broadcast on TV, but the show was never picked up. We had a great lineup of interview guests we were going to do after that for television, mind you. But the pilot itself was wonderful. And one of the two that we did do was Leonard Peikoff in his own home with his art, playing piano. So we interviewed over the course of a couple of days. Leonard Peikoff edited it down to a marvelous interview, Ideas in Action, in the 1990s. And then later on, when around the year 2000, the turn of the century, I posted on the internet a sequence of essays critical of Barbara Brandon's biography, The Passion of Ayn Rand. I didn't tell Leonard. Obviously, I knew him well by that point, because he had said he wasn't going to read the book. It was his first cousin who wrote the book. He said, "I know these people. I know that it's arbitrary. Wouldn't trust a word out of their mouths." And so I didn't even consult him or inform him about my, I didn't know what his reaction would be. So I get a call I'm working for the San Diego DA's office at this point, been working there for a long time at that point. He calls me up, and my wife says, she greets me at the door as I'm coming home that night. He says, "You're going to want to answer this phone call from Leonard Peikoff." I didn't know what he was going to answer. And he said, "Jim, why didn't you tell me you were writing this critique of Barbara Brandon?" He liked it so much, he offered to give me the use of Ayn Rand's private journals on this topic. And so I expanded the book to include a critique of Nathaniel Brandon's memoirs, and used Ayn Rand's contemporaneous journal entries on the Brandons from the 1960s, which completely confirmed my hypothesis. That's what he said. He said, "Jim, you'll be astonished at how Ayn Rand's contemporaneous private notes completely confirm and more your position." And it was even more than I had imagined. New information. So I came out with my book in 2005, The Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics, and Leonard and I went over every single page together. And that was a great experience, getting editing and writing tips, and by the way, more philosophy tips from Leonard. So he's been a huge impact on my intellectual development in my life, and what I owe him cannot easily be calculated.
Jim, you once told me that when you have a conversation with Leonard Peikoff, it's just you, him, and reality. First of all, what does that mean? And second, what is that experience like?
The experience is most of the time, see, I had been interacting with philosophy professors. I had been interacting with intellectuals, PhDs in philosophy, history, economics, things like that. I was interacting with lots and lots of intellectuals, and lots of people who'd known Ayn Rand. And what I mean, it's just you, me, and reality. Every time it was someone else, one of my philosophy professors, arguments from academic authority, arguments from, well, other people think this, arguments from, just sheer, whether it's social, of kind of second-handed social metaphysics, second-handedness, or kind of academic argument from authority thing, or other considerations other than the facts of reality and our logical apprehension of them. What was extraordinary, and the other thing is that in a dynamic where there are other people present, there's a temptation to, when someone asks you a question, and in a lecture context, I think it's appropriate to give the answer that everyone would want to hear. When you're in a more intimate living room format with him, and there's still other people present, there's still that tendency to talk to everyone at the same time. That's not Leonard. He hears in a private setting, when you get a question from him, he'll zero in on you and your understanding. And now it's my context that matters. And that's the other part of what I mean. Now it's Jim's understanding, Jim's context. And he would then put on the context, I want Jim to understand this. So it's Jim's understanding, reality, and me. And no authority, no academic authority, no BS from someone else. What's really bothering you, Jim? What don't you understand or not clear or certain about now? Why? And why are you not clear about it, Jim? Which is a totally unique and individualized context to me. So what I mean is there was no other BS. There was no emotion appeal to my emotions. There was no appeal to academic authority. And it was personalized to making sure that I understood what he was talking about and directed at my context. And so I have no other way of putting all of that except to say it was him, me in reality. You know, one of the things about Leonard's teaching style is that he will always make himself the negative foil, the negative example. It's his rationalism when he's talking about the problem of the psychoepistemological syndrome objectivists call rationalism. Well, he'll make his rationalism the centerpiece. And he does that all the time with his own air. And he's so, you won't think an objectivist would be a boastful, not at all. He is so self-critical, so self-aware, constantly re-examining his own, introspecting. And what a rigorous way he would do that. And then if he learned something, he would use himself as his public example. And more than, I mean, I had never seen anything like that in a teacher, where he was, and again, it was only the facts of reality. It had nothing, he was cutting through the clutter, and he was embodying the very principles that he was talking about. He'll give a course on objective communication, and he'll say, you need to give examples. For example, just the most obvious kind of thing. But he was always seeming to me to try and embody and well embody in the reality he was being then, the things he was talking about normatively. You should do this. Now I'm an example of the very thing I'm telling you should do. That struck me as a kind of intellectual honesty that I had never seen in a PhD or academic in my life before. Someone who's got a PhD in philosophy and has taught philosophy at university level. I wasn't used to that. So the only way I have of describing that is that kind of intellectual honesty, genuineness, direct. And I mean, there were times when there weren't other people present. It was really just me and him at the dining room table and no one else was around. And so isn't it redundant for me to say it's just you, me in reality? No. Oftentimes in private conversations, there'll still be those arguments from authority. The society and the atmosphere is still out there. Emotional appeals are still, when it's just you and one other person talk. Not so for Leonard. For Leonard, it is reality, the facts, the truth. And it doesn't matter if it hurts him or it's you. It's just, we're going to honestly look at the facts and do our best job to understand it properly. I was blown away. It was an example that I wanted to imitate. I wanted to be that honest to myself and to others. And okay, I'm going to get emotional. I really admired him as a mentor. I wanted to model myself on that kind of intellectual honesty. And I wanted to be able to explain to what I do with you, what I've been doing with all these interviews with you, to be able to explain to just an ordinary intelligent, but ordinary and layman, what, the ordinary gal off the street, what this means. And so I would translate it into my own words. I would chew it as Leonard Peikoff taught me how to think. He taught me how to think. And the word chew is part of his vocabulary. It's that ability to reduce a highly abstract idea to its original facts, integrate it with the rest of your knowledge. He calls that cognitive chewing or intellectual chewing. He taught me how to think. Yes, I was familiar with Aristotle's logic. Yes, I was familiar with the scientific method. Yes, I was familiar with the big problems in epistemology. Yes, I'd even read Ayn Rand, and she was shaping how I was thinking. Leonard Peikoff taught me self-consciously, deliberately, methodologically, how to be objective. Again, how do you calculate the value of that, Michael?
Well, you can't. So before we go and move on to his work and his impact and his relationship with Ayn Rand, I just want to say it's clear that you absolutely love Leonard Peikoff. So what I want you to do is to summarize, and I'm going to do something that, people say objectivists were like, robotic thinkers, but emotionally, what I want to know, I want you to put it in a summary, what Leonard Peikoff means to Jim Valiant.
My teacher, my mentor, my hero. I think I made that plain. He's helped me professionally. He's helped me psychologically. If I had an issue at the DA's office that I couldn't think through fully myself because I was in the middle of it, he would help me stop, not be reactive, think it through, don't worry. And he would carefully, intellectually hold my hand more than once. What he's done for Ayn Rand's legacy, I mean, what Ayn Rand meant to me in many other ways, and what I think she could mean to civilization itself. We've talked about the moral revolution and the intellectual epistemological revolution that her ideas are, that I think are the future of civilization, if civilization has a future. And of all the human beings alive on this planet right now, Leonard Peikoff has done more to spread those ideas, make them understandable. And so I will say to you what I said to him, several days ago. If there's one man alive on this planet who's done more to save civilization, if civilization has a future, it's you. That may seem over the top or hyperbolic to some people, but I literally mean that. It's not a figure of speech. It's not, literary exaggeration. The man alive today who is most responsible for the future of civilization, if it has one, is Leonard Peikoff, because Ayn Rand was a novelist. Ayn Rand did not regard herself temperamentally as a teacher at all. She was an artist and an original philosopher, and she had no interest in debating the technical nuances with some academic. Now, that she was willing to engage, and she engaged with professors, she engaged with intellectuals. We've talked about Isabel Patterson. Another one was Professor John Hospers, a leading academic philosopher who did show interest in her ideas. She did convert him from his socialist ways. He was willing to hear critique of his analytic philosophy from Ayn Rand. At the end of the day, he caved to academic peer pressure, in effect. And that was his academic reputation was more important to him than his real engagement with Ayn Rand. What makes Leonard Peikoff so extraordinary is that, unlike Isabel Patterson, a brilliant woman, or unlike Professor Hospers, a leading professor of philosophy at the time, Leonard Peikoff was interested in her philosophy and understanding her philosophy from her perspective. When he was a teenager, his dad Leonard Peikoff was born in Canada in 1933, in Western Canada, Winnipeg area of Canada, semi-rural area of Canada. But his dad was a prominent physician, one of the most prominent physicians in Western Canada. His dad, he actually wrote a book, his dad. And his dad really was a very, very successful and prominent surgeon and physician. His first thought was pre-med, I'll be a doctor like dad. But he was still a pre-med student when he met Ayn Rand. His cousin had met Ayn Rand when she was going to UCLA. So when he visited Los Angeles as a college student, he got a chance to meet Ayn Rand as a teenager. And he goes there, he's read The Fountainhead. It's true, he's been blown away by The Fountainhead. And he has a question about it. Is Howard Roark an idealist or a practical guy? The theory practice dichotomy, he said, because he couldn't imagine that, a person could be both at the same time. And Ayn Rand, then, this teenage boy who had an interesting philosophical question, she then cleared the decks. We're going to answer Leonard's question, and we're not going to finish until Leonard has gained an understanding of my position on this. He was blown away by it. He was blown away by her answer. She was Mrs. Logic. And he then understood the power of philosophy. And he said, that changed my life. And from that moment forward, it was just a question of, when and how, right? It took him a while to switch over, but he moved to New York shortly after Ayn Rand did. And he got his bachelor's, master's degree, and PhD from New York University. He was an outstanding student, but he was very devoted to his studies. And he got his PhD under the prominent Professor Sidney Hook, the leading pragmatist philosopher of his generation, the leading student and protege of John Dewey, who had been influenced by William James, who had been influenced by C.S. Peirce. And so he was basically getting the American pragmatism from the source, and not a very pleasant academic source, because what it ended up doing is giving his own mind all kinds of psychoepistemological problems Ayn Rand would have to sort out for him. But he was dedicated to becoming both an expert in philosophy and, in particular, Ayn Rand's philosophy. And he devoted himself with astonishing. I mean, there were times when he would have, you'd be going to graduate school at NYU, he'd load himself up with a batch of philosophical, highly technical philosophical questions. You go to Ayn Rand, and he could be there until 3, 4, 5, 6 in the morning, talking with Ayn Rand about some technical. They'd be out in the hall. He'd be going down the stairwell of the apartment building, and they'd be yelling at each other. Oh, one more point. Ayn Rand would come out through the front door. One more point, Leonard. I want you to make sure you don't take it this way, and that we have this qualification. And they'd be yelling at each other in philosophy, whatever. He wondered what the neighbors thought. But he was dedicated himself to understanding her ideas more thoroughly than anyone who was really one of her earliest close associates.
All right. So he meets Ayn Rand when he's a teenager. Barbara Brandon said he was 17, I think, when he met her. I don't know the exact age, but he was a teenager.
He was already a pre-med college student. I think he was maybe 18, but it was about then.
Yeah, he's a very young person. He comes across this, generational mind, this absolute genius in Ayn Rand. What a benefit. And, in many ways, well, not in many ways, in the primary way, he has been the biggest carrier of her legacy going forward, of course, in lectures, but also with OPAR. And OPAR's, probably the most famous work, and a lot of people that are listening are probably familiar with it. So I want to talk about some of his other work a little bit. And I want to start with what I believe is his first book, The Ominous Parallels. And what the Ominous Parallels did is to compare America at the time, which was I think he wrote it in 82 or 81. It was released.
Well, he started working on it in the late 60s and published essays on the topic in the Objectivist magazine. But it took him another 10 years
to finish,
because there were methodological things, writing things, and the process of editing that book with Ayn Rand really helped shape his understanding of objectivism. He'd given a course on the basic principles of objectivism in 1976 or 77, which Ayn Rand said was the definitive statement of her philosophy.
Yeah.
When the book The Ominous Parallels came out in 1982, she wrote the introduction and declared, "This is the first book by an objectivist philosopher other than myself." So Ayn Rand, it took him a while to grasp Ayn Rand's ideas, but when he did, Ayn Rand got his, and I think it was because his specialty was philosophy. And so among all her students, he really had the philosophical grip on it. Now, The Ominous Parallels compares, it's astonishingly timely book, even now, 42 years later.
Yeah. Can I tell you something, Jim? So yesterday or today, I don't remember, I get mixed up with my days, but there's this controversy now about Daryl Cooper went on Tucker Carlson and, says Winston Churchill's the real demon of, World War II, that sort of thing. So I get into it a little bit with somebody on, on Twitter, not being mean or anything. I told him, look, I'm not historically versed enough to, challenge this guy on everything that he's saying. But I asked him the question. I said, did you independently verify him and that's why you like him? Or is that he says things that you like and that's why you like him? And he said, well, the thing is, he's talking about this in a way that nobody else ever has. He said, most people just assume Hitler, all of Germany just spontaneously went bad. And I pointed out to him, I said, first of all, it's not true. I said, you could look at the book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer, where he addresses the causes of it. No one says it was spontaneous. In 44, Mises wrote Omnipotent Government, where he addressed the underlining causes. And he says, yeah, but no one talked about Versailles. And I said, look, Keynes in the economic consequences of the peace, 1919, addresses that. But I also reference, I said, in Leonard Peikoff's book, Ominous Parallels, dealt with this. Like so many people have dealt with it, the idea that this did not just happen spontaneously. And Leonard, in the Ominous Parallels, I think really does a good idea of setting the stage for what occurred in 1930s Germany by his analysis not only of Weimar Germany, but the philosophical roots that are leading to it. So in your view, what is the original insight that Leonard has in the Ominous Parallels?
Well, that's, a very interesting point. The basic theme is that ideas are the chief shaper of history. He compares America and its founding in the late 18th century, and called one of the chapters in the book is the nation of the Enlightenment. And then, of course, we can see the rise of Nazi totalitarianism in general, in particular Nazism in the 20th century. And those political dramatic changes also were the result of a philosophy, not the Enlightenment philosophy of liberalism and rights, which America was founded on, but a different philosophy. Germany was a highly educated, sophisticated, and this is what makes it so interesting. Germany has been called the land of poets and philosophers. It's the land of some of the greatest composers of music, like Beethoven, who've ever lived, or Mozart. It's the land of philosophers. People will quote, Kant and Hegel and among the greatest philosophers. And look at Marx and Nietzsche. They certainly shaped the 20th century in a profound way. So it is the role of philosophy in shaping ideas. It is those poets and philosophers who are always taken off the hook. But it is Kant and Hegel. And it's not even so much Hegel's politics was a direct defense of authoritarianism in a naked way. But it's not even the politics of Hegel. It's the deeper ideas. Let me give you one example. Kant argued, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that consequences have nothing to do with ethics, that the good or the bad of a situation, ethically speaking, has nothing to do with the outcome results, and that you should do your duty no matter what the results, even if it means your death sometimes, even if it means the death of your loved ones. For him, for example, a moral test is, if you run into a burning building to save your own family, that went with your desires and inclinations. So we can't really tell that it was a heroic deed when you ran into the burning building to pull out your family. Now, if you went into the neighbor's house, and let's put it even better, both houses are on fire, you go into the neighbor's house first. Now I can know that you're acting without regard to your own self, without your own desires, without your own inclinations. You're doing your duty regardless of consequences. Now think about that. If I say morality consists of doing your duty regardless of how much blood is spilt, that is a Holocaust waiting to happen. People will say, oh, well, Kant, his politics were Enlightenment liberal, or Kant was just a philosopher who wrote words. No, ladies and gentlemen, if you go around saying that it's good and bad, the good and bad have nothing to do with the spilling of oceans of blood or the prosperity and well-being of millions, then I'm afraid I have to disagree with you in the strongest terms. And you're setting yourself up for 20th century totalitarianism. It's a Holocaust waiting just to give you one little example, but it's deeper than that. If you attack reason, if you attack the cognitive faculty of the individual, then you have opened them up to being vulnerable to the latest passerby dictator, demagogue like Adolf Hitler. If, like Hegel, for example, you talk about this great collective spirit in the sky, the absolute or whatever, then what you're saying is that the individual, and Hegel said this, and this does begin to talk about his politics. Hegel said, you as an individual have no significance except insofar as you're part of the ongoing, unfolding dialectical process of history. Well, again, it's the squashes the individual. It says your only significance is in your ability to goose step and sig heil to the latest demagogue. It is Kant and Hegel who almost necessitated something like 20th century totalitarianism. And that is what no one sees, and uniquely Leonard saw in his book and demonstrated. And when he discusses Weimar culture, the culture of the 20s and early 30s, just before the rise of Hitler, a chapter I urge everyone, it'll spine-chilling chapter on the art, science, general cultural attitudes of Germany. I mean, was everybody Nazi? No. But talk about a situation in which the two leading competitors vying for power are the communists, Bolshevik communists, and the Nazis. And it was more and more coming down to just that. Which is it? And who do you support? The Bolsheviks or the Nazis? Oh, that's a nice choice. But that choice was the result, not just of, look, you can go through an economic crisis, even a inflationary crisis, followed by another economic crisis. Well, America was there, and other Western countries were there to help out, and they did. And was the Treaty of Versailles reasonable on Germany? No, it wasn't. But no economic crisis can turn a country into Hitler. Could they, in the wake of the inflation of the early 20s that Weimar Germany was suffering, could they have chosen Mises's alternative, a free market alternative? Why? Yes, a German-speaking economist, Ludwig von Mises, was articulating something very, very different. And the poor thing is that the Liberal Party, for what it was, and a friend of Mises's, the famous sociologist Max Weber, was advocating that kind of liberalism. But they were the weakest party. They were the most apologetic. There was never a chance in hell that anything approaching Mises-like liberalism had a chance in Weimar Germany. That is a philosophical thing. Could Germany have chosen an entirely different route, even in the wake of Versailles? Of course. No crisis tells you how to react to it. It's the values and philosophy that you bring to it that will shape your reaction to the crisis. And so, for example, America's Great Depression, it was caused by government intervention. The Depression itself didn't say go New Deal, go more left and centralized government. In fact, if you had understood it properly, it would have told you to do the opposite policy. No, the crisis is mute. It's the philosophy you bring to it that will tell you how a country will react. And that the philosophy that Germany had, and when you look at Weimar culture, for example, before World War I, it was a different universe, a different culture in the West. And it's really hard, as Ayn Rand herself said, it's hard to describe the culture that existed before World War II. But just give you some examples. The difference was impressionistic art versus abstract expressionism, and Dadaism, and nihilism, and absurdism, and theater of the absurd. And the science went from trying to understand Maxwell's equations about electromagnetic fields to modern, the interpretations of quantum mechanics, which say, are basically primacy of consciousness, radical skepticism. Even in science, it was affected. Modernity hit the West in the 1920s, and it hit Germany even harder. And so there was a moral decay, a moral decadence, a cultural decay, which plays in movies like Cabaret, try to show the the psychological insecurity and the cultural decadence that people were turning to at the time. People were, when it's anti-conceptual like that, people become racists because perceptual differences are all that matter. When there's no sound philosophy, people are choosing between thoughtless hedonism or duty, self-sacrificial duty for the state. Those are the choices. Well, the result is Weimar Germany, and the result is a choice between Bolsheviks and Nazis. The Nazi one was preferred because actually it was more in line with other strands of German philosophy, going all the way back, mind you, to Martin Luther. and his rank anti-Semitism. In any case, there was that combination of cultural things. And the single most important is philosophy, the abstract ideas of a guy like Kant. But Kant, Fichte, Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, that was all the drum roll for Adolf Hitler, wasn't it?
Jim, it was originally given as a lecture or a lecture series that he probably gave many times, but for me, I got it in book form, edited, I think, by Michael Berliner, but don't quote me on that. But Understanding Objectivism was a book that helped me so much. Now, by the time I got around to reading this, I had read virtually everything that Ayn Rand had written. I mean, Objectivist epistemology, I read Opar, Virtuous Selfishness, Philosophy, Who Needs It, everything. But the way in which Understanding Objectivism trained me to think was phenomenal. And like you used the word chewing, and it taught me, like in analyzing, for instance, the concept of morality or rights, not to start with definitions, but to start with my observations and then see how do you arrive at these definitions. And I went through so many of the exercises that he gave when it came to chewing and just pounding these things through my head to really come to understand it, to get what he talked about as you want to get this to be like a truck, because he said nobody avoids things on a concrete level. Yeah,
The most
yes,
abstract ideas.
you need to understand like a truck.
Yeah, the reality view of a truck heading towards you.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And that's it, because you see, concepts, there's this danger with concepts. The higher up the level of abstraction we go, the easier it is for us to get disconnected from its connection to reality, from the evidence of observation, the direct evidence of sense perception on which all of our knowledge should probably be based. And what academics in particular have done is trained into themselves exactly the opposite attitude. Let's start with the definition, because the concept only means its definition. Ayn Rand had a radical approach to concepts. Concepts mean their content. The concept chair means every chair that's ever been. It does not mean a definition you'd find in Webster's dictionary. No, it does not. In fact, definitions can change without the concept really changing. Definitions are merely a reflection of our context of knowledge. Concepts are a human mental tool. On the other hand, they are powerful and useful as insights, as microscopes or telescopes into reality, into the facts of reality. And so the scientific method, for example, is like forcing out of nature some causal secret that it was otherwise hiding from us by zeroing in conceptually on the real cause. Until you reach the conceptual level, right, you really can't understand the flow of sensory evidence. And this was Hume's problem, right? Hume just, how do I see causality in all these fleeting sensations? Well, you can't. It's a concept. It may be an axiomatic level concept, but it's a concept, and you're never going to see necessity or causation, Mr. Hume, in a fleeting sensation. You need a theory of concepts, and that's what objectivism provides. And to absorb, to really understand and appreciate that, people have to apply it. We have to practice it like we would, playing piano does not come naturally. Yeah, I took lessons for many years, and you have to go over it and over it slowly. And then one day, it's funny, your mind has automatized it. And you simply give your hand the order, do a trill there. It just comes out automatically. The way one Olympic trainer put it was, it's trained instinct. The athlete has too many, an Olympic level athlete has too many things that they have to automatize, and they need to focus on only one. So they better have the rest automatized as a trained, in what Aristotle called second nature. See, education is the automation of it, building it into yourself. And so our habitual methods of thinking are really hard to shake. I'll find something persuasive that really ought not to be persuasive, right, because it satisfies my own mental methods, as opposed to an objective method that is fact-focused and keeps our high abstractions carefully connected to, to the facts of reality, to the actual observations that gave rise to them. Concepts are only a means of understanding the world that we all perceive.
Jim, he also in there really, and he does it in Opar too, but in understanding objectivism, it got me to see the hierarchy of concepts. What comes first? Because he isolated it to not all of reality, but just in objectivism. What comes first? You know, man as a value-seeking entity. That's not one of them. I'm just, you know, that's in the concept of objectivism. But the thing that I found amazing was I had always thought, for instance, that rights would come before the initiation of force is evil. I thought, well, the reason the initiation of force is evil is because it's violating rights.
Right. No.
And I remember reading where he says it's the opposite. And I said, he's just wrong. I'm thinking he's just wrong here. But as I went through it, I realized that if you're talking about hierarchically, what would come first from your observations, I'm trying to assess how I should behave. Then on the approach of other people, how should I behave toward them? And I would see I cannot initiate force against them. Then I can see, well, what can I do if they initiate force against me? Well, I have a right to defend myself. And then I was able to put it together and say, wow, he's right. And then another thing that I had already learned this from my own studies, but to have somebody else put it in the way that he did was validating and also edifying, where he talked about how you might read something, and then as you go forward and you learn more, you'll then learn more about what you previously read. So you would come back down and see, oh, now I'm getting this. And that was so validating because it happened to me so many times. So as briefly as you can, and it's tough, I would like you to explain 3 things that I got from understanding objectivism. And I know I'm putting a lot on you to do this, but remember, we're strapped for time. We got to go on to the next things, but I want you to try to do this for us. 1, what is chewing? Because that's vital. The hierarchy, and also the up and then back down the hierarchy, so that you can, as you get to the top, it teaches you more about what was at the bottom. Now put those things together and do your magic.
Huh. Well, chewing is a physical metaphor for a mental thing, right? When we digest food, what we have to do is, you can't just you'd choke if you tried to take the whole thing in all at once. Our teeth are there precisely in order to start breaking it down into little smaller and smaller units so that we can swallow and digest it. And you can't really digest something until it's been broken down. On the other hand, it then gets absorbed into the body, the nutrition gets absorbed, and it gets reintegrated into the whole of who you are. And so I'm going to use this analogy. You need both. You need the analysis to break it down. Take this abstraction, break it down. What is it saying? What exactly does it mean? Right? And let's trace the meaning. Look, I used the word chair, but you used the word rights. Let's take that concept, rights, and take it down to its concrete origins in perceived reality. Yeah, it is. Look, if I was a lion, there'd be no such thing as rights and no problem with force. But it's force, obviously, and the relationship between force and the human tool of survival, the mind, which is what gives rise to the concept of rights in that context. That's the way it's got to go. Now, we then have to, the mind is actually an integrating agency. And so after we've chewed and broken down with analysis into its component parts and taken it all the way down to the facts of reality, we then got to go back. This connects the two, go up and down the chain, by the way. If we're somewhere in the middle with an abstraction, first go down back to the facts where they came from, because that's where it's got to start. Actually, where all our concepts start is when we're kids developing our first concepts. People, mommy, daddy, ball, action, things like that, rattle, concepts, green, blue, soft, hard, those simple concepts direct from reality are actually where we get all our concepts, and we build them up slowly over time. As adults, we enter midstream. We've got a bunch of conceptual knowledge. Now we've got to figure out how, no, wait a minute, I got to look back at it. How did I know that? And to do that, we do the analysis, breaking it up, chewing it down to its component parts, ultimately down to the observations that give it any meaning at all. So remember we were talking about rights last time. It's nonsense until it's ghost. Well, if you don't break it down to the facts of reality you're talking about, of course it's going to be like a concept like ghost. You're not going to have the reality of it. It's not going to be there in your pocket, automatized. And then you've got to reintegrate it with the rest of your knowledge, going back up the chain to do all the what we call horizontal integration, so that it's consistent with everything else I know. And only my conceptual faculty allows that total integration. It permits, I need the unit economy that Ayn Rand talks about in concept formation in order to integrate all of my, that's what concepts are all about. And so the process of chewing is very much connected to the process of reducing things to the facts, the observation from which they come, and then building back up the skyscraper of knowledge while throwing out buttresses and cross-supporting beams so that your knowledge is fully integrated as you build back up to the highest abstractions. And so a very high abstraction, you go higher than rights or something, people do like these complex problems of ontology and logic and these very, very abstract problems in philosophy. You don't stand a hope in hell of getting some kind of satisfying, reality-based, fully logical, totally integrated answer if you don't go about chewing ideas and digesting them in this way, breaking them down, reducing them to the observations that give them any meaning whatever in the first place, and then building it all back all with total integration and logical consistency.
Jim, what you just said, it was such an important, and I didn't want to get into OPAR, but OPAR is what gave me this insight. We might term it, give it a new neologism, the Peikovian cross, we'll call it, because that's what I picture in my head is a cross. Because the way that Peikoff talked about in OPAR, the way you validate ideas, there's two methods that you validate it. One is you connect it to reality, to your observations, your percepts. But the other way is cross. You check them against your other ideas for contradictions. So when he read that, I got the picture in my head of a cross, and it's always helped me to look at it that way, because I know, okay, you need to do both, but because I might have another idea that needs to go. You know what I mean? It reminds me of, remember Piaget talks about assimilation and accommodation, where you either assimilate a new idea, what Rand, the objectivists would call integrate, or you have to accommodate it by changing an idea you already have. And that's what that cross reminds me of.
Right. That's a very good point. The solution to the problem of induction, people say, well, gee, just because I've seen a million swans and they've all been white, how do I know that, quote, all swans, really all swans, even the ones I haven't ever seen or that might come into being in the future, all swans are white? Seeing a million isn't enough. It isn't. You've reduced it to your direct observations. I've only seen white swans. I've seen white swans. I've seen a bunch of white swans, but I've only seen white swans. Is that enough? No. There's other knowledge I know about color in animals. Humans are different in color. Birds are a variety of purples and blues and pinks and all the variety of beautiful colors birds can come in. I know that color is variable. It's very transient. And that indeed, based on the environment they're in, the camouflage might change because of evolution from one environment to the next. So baby animals in the Arctic are white. Baby animals in the savannah are this sort of khaki gray that blends into the savannah. Of course. So given my knowledge of the variable and sort of superficial nature of color in organisms, it would be wrong for me to say all swans are white. I'm alerted to the fact that there's all kinds of other facts doing horizontal integration. See, knowledge, Ayn Rand says in Galt's speech, no concept is valid until you can integrate it without contradiction into the sum. That is every other bit of your knowledge. Then and only then can you really claim anything like contextual certainty. Say, really be able to say, well, based on everything I know, this is the case. And to do that, you need full integration. So let's take a valid induction. All men are mortal. Well, just because I've seen everybody who get, there's incredible death statistics. Yes, absolutely. But how do I really know that all men are mortal? Well, animals die. Every other living organism has a limited lifespan. It's not just humans. People age. People age. I mean, if Peikoff uses the example, if everyone was as healthy as a 16-year-old until the day they died and just suddenly, for no reason, apparently dropped over dead, you'd think, wow, what just happened? But no. People, they get gray hair, they get weaker, they get arthritis. This decay process is slowly happening called aging. And believe me, when you get to my age, you realize there can only be one inevitable conclusion to this process.
Jim,
but the point is, when I do this horizontal integration about that generalization, it works. Yes, all men indeed are mortal. I don't have to wait for you and me to die to know that you and I, Michael, are in fact going to die someday.
Well, speak for yourself.
Okay.
But, this is something else where Leonard, and I think it was in Intro to Objectivist Epistemology. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. But he talked about the very example of the swan. And if it's not white, would it be a swan? And his point was that the color of the swan is not fundamental to its identity. It doesn't matter what color it is. It would still be a swan because the identity of a swan is not tied up with the color of a swan.
When we're really getting knowledge is when we're getting an understanding of the nature of the thing. See, if a person has a terrible accident and say loses their left arm, are they still a human being? Well, of course. The essence of what it is to be a human. What makes something the essence, a conceptual essence? It is that Ayn Rand identified it as that attribute which has the most causal explanation. If you can explain nearly everything or everything with this one thing that makes it different, what makes humans different than the other animals? Well, we do science, we do art, we study the other animals, we conceptually think long range, we have senses of humor. All these things that make humans different and special from animals can be explained by one faculty, the rational faculty.
Yes.
They're conceptual being. So we say humans are the rational animal. And so if I were a different color, if I were a different shape, if I lost my left arm, I'd still be a human because I'm still a rational living being. And all those other causal attributes that flow from that rational faculty, which make humans different from all other animals on this planet, is being identified. When you can do that, when you've got the causal explanation for what really makes this thing different from the other members of the wider class, now you're cooking with gas. You found the essence. You're there. You found a truth. A conceptually discover. Only concepts can reach that kind of truth, but it's a truth about the perceptual world that can only be identified conceptually.
Jim, tell me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong here, but in my view, one of Leonard's most important writings was his work on the analytic synthetic dichotomy. Might be his most important. Brevity, and it was phenomenal. Now, let me confess, when I first read this, it was probably, I might have been 26 years old. I thought I understood it. It's one of those things where when you learn more, you come back and realize how much you really didn't know. But first, do you agree with the importance of that work that I'm attaching to it, his work on the analytic synthetic dichotomy?
Well, I think, Ayn Rand's work, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, is a theory of concepts, how we form concepts, what is the relationship between perceptual observation and the conceptual abstraction, what is the specific relationship, what are concepts actually focused on about the percepts, what is the relationship and their function, I mentioned earlier, unit economy, and how people do that, and the application to different kinds of concepts of consciousness, axiomatic concepts, things like that. She tries to apply it to every category. It's a theory of concept formation. Someone who didn't know the history of philosophy might say, why was she doing this? And at one level, you can understand, okay, she's giving an account of how people come to know, and that has a value. The power and revolutionary impact of her monograph on concept formation is still not even, we haven't begun to appreciate the revolutionary impact of that theory of concepts. It answers the fundamental question, the problem that human Kant wrestled with, the fundamental questions that were left over from Aristotle, the issues that John Locke was struggling with epistemologically. It answers it. It answers the nominalists. It answers the Humeans. It answers the... And so what Leonard is doing here in the analytic synthetic dichotomy is just giving us an indication of how Ayn Rand's theory of concepts destroys some of the most fundamental dichotomies in epistemology, just utterly lays waste. When I was a young philosopher, I walk into my first philosophy class as a university undergraduate. This is literally the truth. I walk in day one to Philosophy 101, Introduction to Philosophy, given at a university. I'm 16 years old. The philosopher, a Greek, by the way, with a thick Greek accent, and he called himself an Aristotelian, mind you. An Aristotelian, mind you. He walks into class, goes up to the chalkboard, and draws a line right down the middle of the chalkboard. And he says, a priori, a posteriori, necessary contingent, analytic synthetic, and never the twain shall meet. Now, analytic synthetic is the terminology Kant gave, and which is sort of applicable to his own approach. But necessary contingent dichotomy in logic, you know, some truths are necessary, you know, like 1 + 1 = true, but they're just true because of the convention, tautology, the way we use language. You know, it's definitionally, you know, these people who just confine it to the definition, it's definitionally true. Whereas there's contingent factors, like God chose from a series of, you know, a menu of realities that God might have chosen from. So it leads to people like Leibniz saying, this is the best of all possible worlds. His solution to the problem of evil was, well, this is really the best any God could have done. So just get over it. So this is the best of all, but no. You see, if God could have, take the boiling point of water. The boiling point of water at a certain altitude is definite. Could it be a degree different? Why, I could imagine it to be different. And this is what they do. If they could imagine that the boiling point of water at a certain elevation and air pressure could be different, maybe God could have made it 10 degrees different. It's just a contingent, happens to be so fact. And a priori, a posteriori, things we can know without experiencing reality, before reality is experienced, and things that require our experience of reality. So if it comes from the senses, these classical philosophers from just a few centuries ago said, look, it's a contingent, it's a posteriori, it's synthetic, you see, is in Kant's mind, it is the product, in effect, of our mode of consciousness, you see? And this is entirely corrupt, and Ayn Rand's theory of concepts utterly refutes it. And so the importance of that, and the reason why Ayn Rand included it in her most important work on epistemology, is because Leonard begins to explain the revolutionary significance of that woman's theory of concepts. But if I were to compare that to all of his other works, I do still think Opar is his most important work because it explains this revolutionary philosophy. I think Dim is more important in a way. Now, you ask what is fundamental. Without that essay, I would have been a lost little puppy as a university undergraduate. I would have been taken in, sucked in. I was already getting started to be sucked in to this way of thinking. And once you get sucked into this way of thinking, it's a mental disease. You're gonna have to work, work hard to get out of your head.
Don't tell Saz that, okay?
Well, I would call it a psychoepistemology. You know, if the test of what is consciousness all about? Knowing, apprehending reality for what it is. So the test of a healthy consciousness is really a cognitive one. How well and effectively and efficiently is it absorbing facts from reality and conceptualizing them and integrating them? Cognition provides an objective test for the health of a consciousness. right there. And so I could say, if I have habituated of bad habits, it may not be a physical disease, Dr. Zaz, but I would say it is a pathological condition that you need to correct in your methodology of thinking. And it can be volitionally corrected. I don't need surgery or infusions of drugs. I, with my own introspection and rehabituating, can get that nonsense out of my head.
Jim, let's not rule out the infusion of drugs.
Well,
they may help. We can't really know. It's contingent. We gotta check it out.
You know that LSD is not a means of cognition.
All right. So you mentioned
Yes.
the dim hypothesis. Now, this is where Leonard Peikoff steps out of the purely philosophical or historical. He becomes both sociologist and prognosticator in this work. And it's probably his most original work. I think that's
Yes.
safe to say. It's where he steps out of objectivism proper and brings you Leonard Peikoff. And
In Common Parallels, he edited that book with Ayn Rand and
right.
Ayn Rand's stamp of approval. It's objective because it was given her stamp of approval in her lifetime.
Right.
But even his treatise is Objectivism. It was based on a lecture course she approved, and I know he did everything about his policy in writing Opar was if I was, this is how he said it to me, if I wasn't certain that Ayn would say, absolutely, Leonard, that's right. If I had any slight doubt in my head that he'd worked with Ayn Rand for over 30 years, and he really asked her about all the major questions of philosophy. So if he had the slightest doubt in his head that Ayn would have endorsed it, he left it out. So Opar and Ominous Parallels are, in my view, expressions of objectivism, the ideas of Ayn Rand, as well as his own education, obviously, but still objectivism. The dim hypothesis is a theory of history. It's historiography. It is
not just, hold on, Jim, but just hold on one second, not just history, but culture, right? Because he talks about, I just want to set the stage of the dim, is that cultures can be characterized in, well, there's really four ways, but three fundamental. He says it's the name of the title, dim, is disintegration, integration, or misintegration. And he uses, if I'm not mistaken, Plato, Aristotle, Kant. So Plato, he says, because he has a system of philosophy that's integrated, but he says it's misintegrated because essentially it's not accurate. It's not derived from reality. Whereas Aristotle is systemic, but is derived from reality. So that would be integrated, where Kant just seeks to obliterate the whole thing by denying the ability of reason altogether. So that's
metaphysics.
Yes. So
metaphysics, the man was he encouraged the next 2 centuries of mental disintegration.
Yes. So in your view, right, what type of impact do you think dim is capable of having on society?
Well, I think it's capable. Well, first, let me defend what I was saying before.
You can. I just wanted to add in the cultural stuff. I wasn't trying to be contrary.
No, I have certain, I'm remarkably, the breadth of my erudition is remarkable, I must say.
Also good looking too.
Man, am I good looking. You're absolutely astonishing that such a handsome. Anyway, I do have. My wife thinks I know everything, and obviously not even close. But but there are certain subjects that I have specialized in, and I do pride myself on my knowledge. Philosophy, history, law. History is one of my areas of specialty. Leonard is trying to understand the course of history, how culture impacts our history. And history may be seen, see, if humans need philosophy, they need integration, they need they need to put it together. And if we don't have a philosophy, we are truly helpless. It forms the base for our values, our methodology of thinking. It is an inescapable base for all knowledge, philosophy. People need, and that's why religion long before people had rigorous philosophy. That's why they were still religious. They needed a worldview. They needed some kind of philosophy, even if it was religion. Obviously, religion is a misintegration, a missed attempt at trying to get that integration of ideas that humans absolutely need. And so history can be seen basically as, until you get it right, as a quavering between misintegrated ideas. Well, those don't work out, so I reject it. So we go to disintegration. Well, I can't live disintegrated. I need some kind of integration. And so history has basically been a quavering between systems of misintegration and periods of disintegration, which are utterly intolerable. True nihilism is something people cannot comfortably coexist with. There have been a great exception insofar as people have discovered a reality-based approach to abstraction, a reality-based approach to our big ideas and philosophy that religion has had such a monopoly on. Plato's ideas were fundamentally religious. His dualism and his mysticism form the philosophical basis, and every religion Plato touched, he transformed into a kind of Platonic dualism, including Christianity and Judaism, by the way, which he had a big impact on. Christian and Jewish thinkers completely reshaped the way they looked at their own God and their own religion after reading Plato. So it's this giant misintegration of religious justification. Aristotle comes along and he says, no. Concepts don't belong to some other supernatural dimension. Your world of forms, Mr. Plato. Concepts are all about here. There's no perfect horse or man or banana in some other dimension. It's the meaning of horse is Dobbin, Bobbin, Secretariat, and that's it. And meaning of man is Michael and Jim and Joe and Frank. That's it. It's the thing that we're integrating with our abstractions. Here is true integration, reality-based integration. Unfortunately, for the most magnificent achievement in integration, maybe in human history, the beginnings of logic, the beginnings of real epistemology. But unfortunately, there was no real Aristotelian movement until the Middle Ages. Thomas Aquinas and those cats, those were the guys that really created a movement based on Aristotelian epistemology. Nope, to know we have to observe, to know we have to use logic. And it's a reality, believe it or not, it was Christian thinkers and Jewish thinkers like Maimonides who 800 years ago, 1,000 years ago, were the first people to develop an Aristotelian movement. And so I'm an atheist. Thank God for Aquinas and Maimonides reintroducing into West, because Aquinas himself was influenced by Maimonides, reintroducing this proper integrated approach of Aristotle. And in the course of that, what happens? Aquinas influences the new humanism, the new Renaissance, the new reality, observation-based world of the Renaissance, which directly leads to the age of science, the observational scientific method in that revolution, which directly leads to the Enlightenment. And all the wonderful political ideas we were talking about, liberalism and religious tolerance and individual freedom, and it climaxes in America.
And two great guys like you and me, too, don't forget.
Don't forget, we are the product of that I tradition, which is civilization itself. And Kant with his disintegration. Now, it had been building up with philosophers who'd been trying to integrate God into their worldviews, like Descartes and even Locke and Leibniz and Berkeley and Kant. There were people trying to integrate God into their worldview. It climaxes in Kant's absolute disintegration. If he has to, he will make this whole observable world a product of our consciousness so that the real reality can be God and our immortal soul in some noumenal world. The mystical stuff is the real stuff, you see. The stuff scientists examine, observe, that's just all a phenomenal effect of our consciousness. It's consciousness provided. So we're really just studying the way we have to think about things when we study Newtonian physics, which existed in Kant's time. That's literally, and Kant knew. So not knew him personally, but knew his work quite well. And so, but what Kant is saying is, oh yeah, all that scientific stuff, well, has nothing to do with reality. That's just the way people have to look at things. Reality is God and the supernatural. And in order to accomplish that, in order to save a religious worldview, in effect, from the ravages of Enlightenment reason and the Aristotelian I people. He did a full-on D, and a brilliantly, twistedly evil, diabolical D, which is very much destroyed in the minds of, I think, anyone who really studies this. We're just talking about how Kant led to the other German philosophers and how Kant and those other German philosophers led to Hitler. Yeah, that's the kind of D that you can get out of a Kant. Now, Ayn Rand is the ultimate defense of I. Ayn Rand is the defender of the Aristotelian thrust of integration, abstraction based on reality, reality-based abstraction. That's what her theory of concepts is all about. That's what her novels are all about, a reality-based philosophy, to put it simply. And I saves us because, you see, M will always give rise to D, and D will always give rise to a need for more integration. So until we get this I thing right, history is doomed to be a quavering between D and M. Ayn Rand fulfills the promise of Aristotle, corrects Aristotle where he needs to be corrected in light of the problems of more recent philosophy. Ayn Rand answers human Kant directly in their sledgehammer de-smashing of Western thought and the Enlightenment.
Jim, before I let you go,
Yes.
something that Leonard Peikoff wrote that I really enjoyed was My 30 Years with Ayn Rand. It was so wonderful. It was a moving tribute, but it also just got me to see appreciation that it's important to wipe out non-essentials, because he said, yes, she was angry and you know, at times, but the benefits of her mind were well worth whatever anger she ever had. Now, you've had 40 years with Leonard Peikoff. So before we go, if you had to say to Leonard Peikoff what those 40 years have done for Jim Valliant, what would you say?
What Ayn Rand, and I am emotional. Why'd you do that? What Ayn Rand, see, you picked a really good example. His brilliant speech, My 30 Years with Ayn Rand. And he explains his relation, how she taught him how to think. Because you know something, when Ayn Rand criticized him and got angry at him, he stopped and he thought. He didn't take it personally. Most of the time she was right. Were there times when Ayn Rand, look, this woman nearly starved to death in the wake of the Russian Revolution. This woman, her titanic literary and philosophic achievements not only went unappreciated, they were attacked as the very opposite of what they were. So Ayn Rand had reason to be angry. Could that anger come out unfairly? Yes. You know, sometimes Ayn Rand thought, you know, when she wrote Atlas Shrugged, she thought everybody got every implication of everything she said. But I've read it numerous times, and I'm still learning from it every time I read it. And so Leonard would come up to Ayn Rand, and he would say, you know, I have this problem from philosophy class. Can you answer it? Well, didn't you get that from Atlas Shrugged? It's there. And he'd say, no, I've read it more than once, and I did not get it from Atlas Shrugged. She would say, no, boy, you remember this? And then he'd look at it. Oh, I thought you meant this and this. Well, I did mean that and that, but don't you see that? Then you read it again. Of course, you had answered it right there, plainly as could be. Yes. And so she would get angry because she assumed you had this same integrating capacity she did sometimes. Now, it was only occasional. I don't think it characterized her, but she could be harsh, sharp, and even occasionally unjust in her anger. But Leonard does say it so well. He said, what a small price to pay for getting the benefit of this fiery genius.
That's the exact phrase he used, fiery genius. Yeah.
Yeah, and he knew that he could, you know, study from one of these, what he characterizes the wishy-washy types, and the followers of Ayn Rand who are wishy-washy types, who might have been kinder to him but not have given him the electric, revolutionary epiphanies that he was constantly having with Ayn Rand. He was never harsh to me. I want to contrast in that way. There were times he corrected me, and I mean corrected me. He could be going through something I'd written, or we'd be talking and I would say something. He would stop and he would say, Jim, no, that's very wrong. And I want to tell you why that's wrong. But he didn't get angry. But nonetheless, there are people who he did even that to, who took it personally and who crawled away as Leonard is mean, has offended me. And because they weren't focused on reality. They weren't being self-critical at all. They weren't saying, well, maybe he's right. I did. And at the end of the day, I said, thank you for correcting me. The best thing you did was tell me you're wrong, Jim. And okay, what Ayn Rand was to him, Leonard Peikoff was to me. He taught me how to think, how to write. He taught me the relevance of ideas to my life, just like he explains Ayn Rand, could see a popular event, a current event, and immediately I conceptualize its essence. So some concrete news story goes by, everyone says, oh, that's the streaker at the Academy Awards say. Nope, Ayn Rand would philosophically analyze why this guy did it, what the significance is, and why everyone's reacting the way they do. And she could take any event like that, give it philosophy, and Leonard was constantly taken aback by something he would have just dismissed as, young man's hijinks, no. Philosophically analyze it, think about it. He did that to me. He showed me the relevance of it. Well, when he was reading his essay, Fact and Value, which I also think is an important essay of his, when I was going to his home on Saturday nights, that was an essay he read to us aloud. And he asked for questions. I wasn't clear. I understand how facts can provide the objective basis for values, but Ayn Rand and you say that all facts are value laden. There's no value-free fact. I understand how values are based on fact, but how are facts all value laden? Oh, wow. Leonard then goes into this brilliant extemporaneous discussion of why that is so. In my own mind, hearing that, I can hear it in my head now. I remember driving away from his home, carefully thinking about what he said. It's now lodged in my head in such a way that now my values are both. They're real to me. People say, why are you so passionate and still so rigorously logical? You can explain it so clearly, and yet you get so excited, and because there's no reason emotion, there's no value fact dichotomy for me. I can be rational and I can be passionate, and on the same basis. And without Ayn Rand, and in particular in my personal life, without Leonard Peikoff, I could not be that kind of an integrated being. And so even the way I conceptually understand my values and the way I passionately enjoy them is the product of, when I say something like, I owe him more than I can easily calculate, he has saved my soul, as so many people say Ayn Rand saved theirs. Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff saved my soul. That old Beach Boys song, God Only Knows What I'd Be Without You? I'm an atheist. God only knows what I would be without Ayn Rand, and in particular, Leonard Peikoff.
Jim, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and knowledge with us. And I just thank Dr. Peikoff as well, because without him, the ideas of Ayn Rand would have not come to me in the manner in which they did. Jim, where can the people find you?
Well, it won't be much of a surprise to people to find out that I work for something called the Ayn Rand Center UK. It's out of Great Britain, and I do regular podcasts, multiple podcasts every week for them. I teach courses for them too. I'm doing one on the Constitution of the United States. We cover all of Leonard Peikoff's courses in specialized courses. I am a Peikoff scholar, and but it's for paid subscribers. But the stuff that we do on a daily basis is open for everybody. So do check out Ayn Rand Center UK and consider, just like you view that, this is essential viewing, right? The Rational Egoist.
Yes, it is.
And if you want more from me, this forum, the Ayn Rand Center UK, are the places you'll find it. So, but I'm also on Facebook every day answering questions, both my book on Ayn Rand and my book on Christianity, and anything else that anyone wants to ask me about. So hit me up on Facebook. Um, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jim.
Sure.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.